Hello and welcome to another podcast of the Interpreter Hub. We are excited with this week's guest because he is going to be speaking about a topic that's near and dear to all of our hearts. But before we do that, I am Mark Rockford, been in the industry for just a few years, right? Even though I have this baby face, I have probably more experience than Mateos has years alive. No, I'm kidding. But we are here to talk about language today. Mateos, you want to introduce yourself and then you can segue to our guest.
For sure. Hello, everybody. Mateus here again. Today's a very special episode for us. I always say at the beginning of every episode that this is going to be a special episode, but this one is actually very, very special to me. We are here with Sérgio today. Sérgio is going to be introducing himself very shortly. Sérgio was my mentor during a very important moment of my life. I was trying to get a certificate that was very important for my career. Sérgio helped me out tremendously. He's an expert at what he does. It's a pleasure for me to have him here today, and he's going to introduce himself now. And again, guys, take benefit of this episode because the information we're providing to you here is extremely valuable. So, Sérgio, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's great. My name is Sérgio Pantoja. I'm based in Brazil. I've been an English teacher for the past 20-something years, 22 years to be more precise. And for the past 10 years, I've been working predominantly with exam preparation, helping teachers mostly prepare for Cambridge exams, especially the most advanced ones, C1 Advanced and C2 Proficiency. And since 2016, I've been teaching only online. So now 100% of my students, most of them are also based in Brazil, but I have students from all over the world. So Spain, Italy, Hungary, many countries you can think of. I have already had students from all over the place.
So you would say that mostly your students are advanced students, so your target audience, like intermediate to advanced?
Yes. I'll say that 90% of the students that I have today are at C1 or C2 level. At least they're aiming at C1 and C2 level of proficiency, even though I have other teachers who are at B2. But yes, most of them at C1 and C2 level.
Okay, you're using a lot of letters, right? So explain to our audience what is the B level, the C level, like what does each one mean, if you would, so that they're on the same page and they can understand what we're talking about going forward.
Yes, these letters, A1, A2, B1, C2, they refer to what we call Common European Framework of Reference for Language. Normally we refer to it as CEFR. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, basically it's a guideline. And this guideline helps us better understand different levels of proficiency. So in a nutshell, what the Common European Framework is, it's a guideline that divides students or people who are learning English, not just English, but any other language for that matter, into different levels of proficiency. So I think that it's better if I illustrate very quickly what the letters mean. If you consider A1 and A2, we're talking about basic users of the language, so people who can use the language in like simple situations. Then if we move on to B1 and B2, we have what's called the independent users of the language, so people who can use the language in most day-to-day situations, who are familiar to them, of course. And then we move on to C1 and C2, which are the proficient levels, the levels where people are expected to be very fluent and handle complex situations.
So C2 is the absolute top.
Exactly. Yes. That C2 is the last one. It's the one that supposedly once you reach this level, you can virtually understand pretty much everything you hear and read.
Well, that's awesome. But at what level is somebody considered fluent? Like C1, C2, so C2 is the level that we're considered fluent, or would you say B2, C1?
I think it will depend a lot on how you define fluency, because I know that most people tend to define fluency as the ability to speak a language easily, comfortably, well, and accurately in most situations. If you think about, for example, handling situations that are familiar to you and in a, let's say, socially, professionally settings, we could say that a B2 and C1, once you reach this level, you can have, most conversations that you can have, you can get across your ideas well, and then you feel fluent. But then, of course, you can argue that even though you are fluent to deal with basic level situations, you're not going to feel very comfortable handling academic situations or situations that require specific jargon. So, but I would say between B2 and C1, you can definitely consider yourself fluent.
Awesome. So digging into that real quick, an interpreter who's handling medical situations, who's handling financial or other specific terminology, as well as idioms, right? All the slang that's going to come up. You would say that they should probably be at C1 or C2 to be working professionally. Is that kind of where I'm understanding their level of fluency?
Yes, definitely. Yes, if you're considering people that are going to have to deal with, especially, I mean, as you mentioned, requires like specific terminology and jargon, I would say that at least C1, preferably C2.
Okay, awesome. Can you lose your level? Like, could I be at a C2 and then degrade or like downgrade or like fall to a C1? Do you ever see that?
That's an excellent question, Mark. I think it is possible. It doesn't mean that once you have reached this level of proficiency, you can rest on your laurels. Not really. I mean, I wish it were possible, but the thing is, when it comes to C2, and if you think about, and here I think it's important to make a point because we talk about C2 from two different perspectives, right? Receptive and predictive. So receptively, you can understand very complex long text, very complex text. You can understand, as they say, virtually, to quote the Common European Framework, virtually anything you hear or read. And in terms of like predictive skills, writing and speaking, you are able to use the language in a way that allows you to be very precise and nuanced. And this is something that for you to keep, I would say that you have to keep practicing. Otherwise, especially if you are someone who, if you are a non-native speaker of English, and then you live in a country where you're not exposed to English 24/7, if you don't have opportunities to keep on practicing, yes, you're very likely to lose it.
That makes total sense.
I
So
have a
how does
question,
somebody like
though.
Mateus? Oh, go for it, Mateus.
No, my question would be like, if you reach the C2 level, like we're talking that's a very complex level, you have to understand virtually everything that you hear and that you read. When we compare a C2 level to a native level, what is your perception about that, especially about native level? Because some people say, oh, I have native level of English. Is C2 and native the same thing?
I don't think so. So much so that Cambridge has changed it. If I'm not mistaken, many years ago, once you took the C2 and you passed it, at the back of your certificate, there was something along these lines. You have you are compared to a highly qualified native speaker of English. If I'm not mistaken, these were the words. Not anymore. Now they prefer to use the term highly competent user of the language instead of a highly, well-educated or highly educated native speaker of English. Because I think that in a way, when people say, well, my English is like a native speaker, but who is this native speaker? Maybe they are idealizing it. So you idealize this native speaker of English who doesn't make mistakes, who can use, because I think that if we make a comparison here, the same happens in Portuguese. You have people who speak Portuguese who are native speakers of the language, but cannot use the language effectively in academic settings, right?
Yes, for sure.
And it also happens with people who speak English as a first language. Not every single native speaker of English can use the language professionally, academic, and socially. So in a way, I think that people idealize this native speaker of English that is perfect, that can use the language in all situations. So I think we have to be careful when we make this comparison.
That makes total sense because, yeah, native speakers themselves have a huge variety of levels. I mean, typically in the United States, we talk about their grade level, right? What are they? Do they write at a fifth grade level? Do they speak at a fifth grade level, right? How does that play out? And I think we can go kind of on the other side of that too, because you keep saying academic, which is wonderful, but most people don't speak at an academic level in their daily lives, right? We're not pontificating. We're not elucidating. We're not, using other vocabulary, right? Like that's not how we speak, right? In a setting for interpreters where the doctor's using Latin medical terminology, right? Like that makes sense. But, most people aren't going to be responding like, well, the right lateral, whatever, right? I don't think I've ever heard a patient that themselves is not a doctor respond with that level, right? So, I think you're right. There's a wide variety of native, and then there's I don't know. Like I think you said effective is the word that jumped out to me, right? Like so, what's an effective level of production, right? So when you're talking about the rating, the C2, I'm assuming it takes both into consideration, both your understanding and your production, right? So you could have an amazing production and like if I'm sorry, an amazing understanding, but I'm assuming that most people have more trouble with the production than the understanding. Is that a true statement?
You're absolutely correct. Yes, yes. Um, and I would like to add something to what you've just mentioned. I feel that, and uh, of course, it may sound like a generalization, but oftentimes what happens is when students start getting exposed to what we might describe as C2 level of English through texts and podcasts, whatever. Something that happens is that they start overusing certain words that may lead them to sound unnatural. So it's interesting because you develop this awareness that for you to pass the C2 level of proficiency, obviously you have to boost your vocabulary, you have to learn lots of new words, but you still have to make decisions regarding like how natural is it going to sound in this particular context, like is it appropriate, and that's something that takes, I would say that it takes time for you to develop this awareness of I have this great repertoire of words that I can use, but I still have to pick and choose the ones that are appropriate for the context. Does it make sense?
100%. Right. So how do you recommend that they gain that awareness, right? Like how do they gain that understanding of when it's I'm going to say socially or contextually appropriate to use the language that they're using?
I often insist on the idea that it's not just about learning new words, but also understanding the context that they are used in. So we talk about pragmatics, for example. Okay, you have learned a new word, but we often focus on. I believe that some of the people that are watching it are familiar with the term collocation. But if you're not, the idea of collocation is like words that frequently appear together. So we often focus that sometimes if you combine this word with another word, it may not sound unnatural. So it's important for you to know how words frequently combine, so you can use the words in a way that is going to help you sound naturally. But in addition to that, I'd also mention that it's important to think about the context you're going to use these words in. Because when people are writing, I think that I can give you a very good example. When it comes to writing, and they're writing an essay, so they're trying to use most of the words they have learned, and then they try to squeeze in new words into their text. And then you see that it can be very hard at first for them to be consistent in terms of register. So you have some new words here that are informal, and then others that are more formal. So you can see that, okay, on the one hand, they're making an effort to use the new vocabulary, but on the other hand, they still lack appropriateness. So it's difficult to juggle it at first because you're learning lots of new words, lots of new vocabulary, but you still haven't developed this awareness regarding how to use them properly.
Awesome. I have a question, like regarding our community here, because we have a lot of interpreters here. Our show is mostly for interpreters right now, and they're always striving to get better with their English skills. And coming from you, who's an expert, can you tell right away when someone has like a low C1 level and when they have a solid C2 level? Is that clear for you when you're speaking to someone? Can you evaluate their level right off the bat and say, okay, that's a C1 level, this is a C2 level? What is the characteristic that you look for when you want to see if someone can speak at a C2 level?
Sometimes it's not that easy, Matheus, because as Mark said, you may be familiar with a lot of words but when you're having like a casual conversation, you're not going to use these words. So maybe someone can have a C2 level of proficiency, but because they're having a casual conversation, they're not going to try to use, all those structures and all that vocabulary they know. But of course, if you let them know, okay, I'm going to test you. So, the situation here is because it's important for me to gauge, your level of proficiency and how good your vocabulary is and so on and so forth. So once you let them know that they're going to be tested, then most of them are going to try to show off in the sense, okay, let me show them that I have this very good level of vocabulary, that I can be very precise and nuanced. So the people who have a high level of English, they're going to try and show it once you have this conversation because they know they're being assessed. But if it's a casual conversation, it can be hard to tell if you just rely on fluency as an indicator of proficiency.
Awesome. And what is the major difference? Yeah, like what's the difference between C1 and C2 for those who are watching here? Because you said that they're both proficient. So what is the actual difference between C1 and C2?
I would say that once you have reached a C level of proficiency, you can definitely be more precise, more nuanced, and more idiomatic. You have this flexibility, for example, to, I would say, adapt to your interlocutor. So you can be more formal if you want to. You can be more idiomatic if you want to. You can like pick and choose. Um, at C1, you can still handle complexity. You sound extremely fluent, but maybe it can be very difficult for you to be precise, even if you want to, because you haven't reached that level that's going to allow you to be more precise.
Okay. So it seems to me like you're saying the value for an interpreter to be at C2 is the client experience, right? Because they'll be able to do a better job and they'll be able to adapt and they'll be able to match the register, the idiomatic expressions, the slang, right? Because I'm going to try to keep my register down, right? Because not all of our listeners are necessarily at the C2 at this point, right? And we would like to encourage them to get there because anything that will add value to their business can make them more money, right? And so if they can give a better client experience, whether that's in the interview, whether that's actually on the phones or on video, right? I think that's a value add for them so that they can keep struggling to get to the C2. How long does it take somebody to get to the C2? So full disclosure, I speak 2 languages. I think everybody knows that by now. I hope English is my first, even though I don't always speak it that well, right? And Spanish is my second. And my Spanish, I have not taken a level test to see where I'm at, right? But like I live in Mexico, right? Like currently I'm immersed in Spanish. My Spanish is, I'm going to say damn good for a non-native speaker. And my Spanish will get into my English. And just like my English will get into my Spanish, there's some overlap, right? So like how long does it take someone in English specifically, because that's the language everyone has to speak to be an interpreter in the United States, right? I know that there are other combinations. You can argue with me all you want, but the main language you're going to need is whatever you speak natively and English, right? So how long will it take somebody to get to that C2 level, and how do you recommend that they get there?
Okay, Cambridge talks about about 1,000 hours of instruction, which is different from, yeah,
right?
like you,
because you're not going to do it. You do an hour every day.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
sorry.
and they're oh, no worries, and they're very specific in the sense that it's not just 1,000 hours of you like getting exposed to the language, but 1,000 hours of instruction. So having classes. Um, but based on my experience, I would say that it takes most people 8 to 7 years. Like if you start today learning English from scratch, like a real beginner, it may take you something like 7 years, 8 years. It varies a lot from person to person. But generally speaking, most people that come to my courses, they have been studying for 8 years, 9 years, sometimes 10 years.
I have a more specific
Yeah.
question though, because I have a lot of people on our community that are asking me how I achieve this level and how they can improve their own English, because companies oftentimes will require that you take a test to showcase your proficiency, right? And the EF set is very famous amongst our community members. Everybody's taking the test, and usually I get people who are at the high end of the B2 level and they're asking me, how can I move to C2? Like realistically speaking, from a high-end B2 or low C1 level, how long does it take to have a solid C2 level across all multiple skills like listening, reading, speaking, and writing?
Again, it would depend a lot on the person and how much you can allocate for that. But I would say that if you study diligently, I mean, study really, really hard, I would say that maybe 2 years.
2 years, right? So it's not like I can do it in a month, because they're always like, how can I
In a
get
month?
C2 level in 1 month? Yeah.
I wish I wish I could. I had a solution for that before like a month, but no, I don't think so. Uh, if you are a C1, like you have a solid C1 level of English, and for you to go from C1 to C2, I've seen it in like, but I would say that this is the exception, not the rule. People going from C1 to C2 in 1 year.
1 year, not 1 month, guys.
Yeah,
See, an expert is saying that it's
yeah,
not Mateus.
yeah. Studying really, really hard.
When you
I
say
see.
studying, what does that entail, right? Like, what are you doing? Because most people are going to get to C2. I mean, they might know grammatical structures, but you don't have to, like, how do I say this? So a lot of the native Spanish speakers I know, I can talk about subjunctive and other like verb forms and tenses, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, right? It just goes right over their head, right? But I don't think you need to know, like, do you have to be able to diagram sentences, right? Do you have to be able to break it down into its parts to actually get that C2 level? Or is it something you can pick up without necessarily knowing every single grammatical structure and what dangling participles are, what prepositions are, the parts of speech or whatnot? Like, tell us a little bit more.
I think we can make a distinction here, Mark, between language proficiency and language awareness. Okay, having language awareness, like you're able to explain stuff. You can get a sentence, for example, you can say, oh, this is a dependent clause, this is an independent clause, this is a complex sentence, and so on and so forth. But they don't test that because they're not going to be asking you questions to explain stuff related to the language. I often give an example of a 17-year-old student that I used to have, and this is a very interesting story. I'm going to give you the short version of it. He started studying English at the age of 5. So by the time he was 17 years old, he decided to take the C2. And he had never taken any Cambridge exam. So we would spend some time on reading strategies. For example, what you should do first, second, read the text, the questions, underline keywords. And then he would read the text and get 100% at C2, like he was preparing for the C2. And I would ask him, okay, what kind of strategies did you use? Did you look for this and that? And he would simply say, well, I just read the text and answered the questions. So it came like naturally to him. And other parts of the exam that he was supposed, for example, to look at sentences, and it's called keyword transformation exercise. So basically you have to rephrase the sentence using a keyword. And in this case, for example, he would do this very naturally, even though he wasn't able to explain to you, oh, okay, this is a conjunction or this is a preposition. To cut a very long story short, he took the test, he passed, he got grade B, he passed it. But if you ask him questions like, can you find a phrasal verb in the text? He had no idea what a phrasal verb was. So technically, you can still take the exam and pass, even though you're not able to talk about the language, to explain things, because they're really testing how well you can use the language. They're not going to ask you to explain anything. So just to make this distinction, yeah, and the opposite is also true. There are people who can talk about things like, you give them a sentence, they can scrutinize the sentence, but when it comes to using the language, then they're not that good.
Perfect.
Awesome.
So I mean, that's like comparing me to a basketball player. Like, I know how to shoot a basketball, and I could maybe break down the things, right, the movements and whatnot. But I am not a basketball player, never will be, and I don't have the talent or the aptitude that the NBA players do. Or maybe I should use soccer, because everyone here is probably more familiar with soccer. It's more of an international sport, right? So the coaches can tell you about the different positions and plays and movements and whatnot, but the players, they're not thinking. I don't think they're thinking like run 2 steps to the left and over here, right? They're actually just executing, right? So this is more of an execution rather than necessarily the technical knowledge. Am I on the right track, Sergio?
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's going to be reassuring to our audience, right, Mateos? Because most of them are like, crap, I don't want to know what a subjunctive is. I don't want to have to dive into
that either,
dangling.
But I think I got great results with the exam, even though I don't know a lot about like breaking down grammatical structures and stuff like that. But I have another question for Sergio.
Certainly did.
Specific, Sergio. Everybody is always using EFSET to evaluate their English, and I don't really like EFSET because I feel like people can cheat the exam very easily. You can have a dictionary with you. What's your perception about EFSET? If you have a C2 level on the EFSET exam, is it the same as having a C2 proficiency certificate?
They basically offer 2 different types of exams, right? The 50-minute one and the 90-minute one. The 50-minute one, as probably most people know, it assesses receptive skills, reading and listening. It doesn't really test your speaking and your writing. Whereas the 90-minute one, then you have to write and you have to speak. But still, if we compare, and you might say I'm a little biased because I've been working with Cambridge exams for the past, 15 years. If we, there's a simple comparison we can make here. The 90-minute exam, which is the EF, and the C2 proficiency exam, which is a 4-hour exam. The EF1 is a multi-level exam, right? You can take it and you can get, for example, A2, B1, C1, C2, so it's multi-level. Whereas the C2 is specifically aimed at people who believe they have reached a C2 level of proficiency. I would say that this Cambridge one is it's much more thorough regarding what it tests. Even though you might say that the 90-minute one they're pretty much testing the same skills, but I'd say that in terms of depth, the Cambridge is way better.
Well, yeah, I mean, 4 hours compared to 90 minutes is an obvious time difference, right? But it sounds to me, and I'm not the expert, you guys are the expert. It sounds to me like the EF set is more about scaling you, placing you on a scale, but the Cambridge actually says, okay, if you think you're at this level, we're going to validate that you are at this level, right? So I'm not going to, the C2 test is not going to say, well, no, you're actually a B1. It's going to say, yes, you are C2, or no, you're not C2, right? Am I close or no?
That's it. You can still take the C2 and get a certificate. Like if you, let's say that you take it and you haven't reached the number of points that you were supposed to get, you can still get a C1 level certificate. It's still possible, but it's still one. But as you said, the primary goal of the exam is to test whether you have reached the C2 level of proficiency in relation to writing, reading, speaking, grammar, vocabulary, so on and so forth. Yeah. Unlike the F, which is multi-level.
Also accreditation, right? I think it's different when you have a certificate from Cambridge, because I remember the day I took my exam, I had to go into a room. People were monitoring you all the time. You don't have access to your cell phone. You don't have access to a watch. You don't have access to anything at all. It's just you and the
They're
exam.
strict.
Yeah, and the EF set, you can take it at home. You're feeling comfortable. There's no pressure.
Plus, you said you have tools, right? So there's obviously a difference if you have some tools available to you than if you don't, which, that may or may not be as valid, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, they're both metrics that interpreters can use, right? And obviously they see the value in language proficiency, as we've discussed. Going back to studying for, let's just say the Cambridge, Sergio, can you give us some like nuts and bolts? Like, what are your recommendations? Is it working with a tutor like yourself? Is there immersion techniques that they can use, keeping in mind that they're going to be in their home countries? They're not going to be, in most cases, traveling to the United States, right? They may or may not have significant others that speak the language, right? What are your tips for on your own, working away, just keeping going on, I'm going to say probably a daily basis, but you're going to be the one that tells us that, like, to keep moving up the scale on language proficiency and getting closer to that C2 level, right? Like, what do they need to do?
I would say that there are basically two main aspects that we can focus on. The first one is that you have to develop exam techniques and strategies. Because I know people, for example, that even though they had a C2 level of proficiency, they failed the exam, even though they had the language level, because they were unfamiliar with the exam. So they didn't know, for example, what a specific part of the exam was testing, what they were supposed to do. On the other hand, there are people that, because they took other Cambridge exams, like B2, they took the B2, they took the C1, and they're very similar in terms of, the format is very similar. Even if you compare C2 with B2, the types of exercise you have and the tests, they're very similar. Of course, that the higher you go, the more complex it gets, obviously. But the format is very similar. So there are people that are familiar with B2, they took B1, B2, and then C1. Then when they get to C2, because they have a better understanding of what to expect, they think that it's just a question of making some adjustments here and there. But then they forget that they still have to develop the language in order to pass the exam. So we really have to strike a balance between language proficiency and exam strategies and techniques. I think that once you're able to combine both, then when you go for it, you are much more comfortable because you know what expects you and you feel confident in relation to the language you're going to have to use. Now, Mark, I feel that one of the greatest challenges people have, especially people who are not living in a country where English is the spoken language, is the fact that it's not that easy to find opportunities to expose yourself to C2 level language. To give you an example, once a teacher told me, well, I always try to expose myself to English. Okay, what have you been doing? Oh, I've been watching Friends. Watching Friends is great, but it's not going to help you improve your language for the exam because you need something that is well above it. So you also have to choose your sources very carefully to make sure that you are reading texts that are going to push you. Like I often tell them, you have to read texts from the New Yorker, the Atlantic, those texts that deal with complex issues. that sometimes you're going to have to read the same paragraph 3 times to really grasp what the writer is saying, because the ideas are so complex and intricate that they're really going to push you. Or you're going to have, for example, to listen to a podcast where people are like, one of my favorites is Intelligence Squared Debate, because they often talk about very highly complex topics. And I feel that people keep watching the same stuff and they say, oh, I've been exposing myself to English by reading this or by listening to that, which is great, but it's not going to help you, make progress if your goal is to take the C2 proficiency exam.
That makes sense. So what's the cost? Like, what does the exam cost me as an interpreter? How much is the every attempt?
In Brazil, it's something in the range of 1,500 reais in dollars. Let me see.
Like $300.
$300, yeah, thank you. $300.
Which is, that's not chump change. That's a fair amount of money. Why would someone want to have that C2 certificate? Like, what kind of doors or what kind of opportunities does it open for them?
From an interpreter's perspective.
Well, I mean, definitely from the interpreter perspective, but not all of our interpreters are only interpreters, right? Some of them also do move on to other things. Some of them have other tasks they go. So, from any perspective, really, like from the C2, if you want to start with the interpreter perspective, but if you would also speak to other things that you've seen in you said 25 years of experience?
I've been teaching since 2002. Yes, 2002. So yeah, and worked with Cambridge exams for the past 15 years.
Cool. Yeah. So what doors does it open?
I think that if you are, I'm going to start with teachers. So if you're a teacher, if you teach English and you have taken the exam and you've passed it, you can get a job pretty much anywhere in the world. I mean, of course, there are also other legal stuff that you have to take into account, right? Like your passport, if you can work in that country. So not taking that into consideration, of course.
Correct. Yeah.
Once you have that, then once you have a C2 level of English and you have like an international teaching certificate, like the CELTA or a TESOL certificate, it really opens doors because you can prove that I have teaching qualifications, but I also can, like linguistically speaking, I have a very high level of English that allows me to teach like most levels or all levels comfortably. Mateus was my first student who is an interpreter. It was a very interesting experience to have him in the course. And the reasons he gave me when we started talking to each other, as to why he wanted to prepare for the exam and take it, made me realize how important it is, not only for teachers, because I am used to people, trying to take a C2 because I'm a teacher or because I want to work abroad. And I'm not as a teacher, but in my career, it's going to require me to have, to negotiate and have very complex conversations. So if I have a C2, it's going to be easier for my company to, send me abroad and I can work there. So as you said at the beginning, it's the highest thing there is in terms of language proficiency certificate. So once you have that, I think you're good when it comes to proving how good your English is.
Awesome. So then it's just up to you being creative and looking for the opportunities, is what it sounds like, right? Because you're the best, at least linguistically speaking.
Yeah, I got a question again, because I don't think Sérgio and I had the opportunity to discuss my results, but one thing that I had that was very interesting is that I got full maximum score for the speaking section, 230 out of 230. Is that something common to see? And how can I improve, Sérgio? Because I don't think I'm good enough. I talk to Mark about it all the time. We're hosting a podcast in English, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, man, but there's something holding me back still. Is that something common, a result like that? And how can I improve? So I'm asking you for some pieces of advice live.
No, it's not. It's not that common to get 230 points, which is the maximum number of points you can get. He sells himself too short, right? He's really humble. No, it's not that common. To be honest, a lot of people who take the C2 proficiency, they don't fail the speaking part of the exam. But it doesn't mean that they get 230 points, which is, again, is the highest number of points you can get. Now, as far as advice is concerned, I think that it's a question of understanding what you want to improve, right? Is it like you want to learn more words because you feel that, which is not your case, but you feel that your English is not that precise, so you want to be even more precise, or you want to develop vocabulary, in relation to a specific area, so like jargon and terminology. To give you an example, I think I can use myself as an example. I feel comfortable, in most situations. But if, like, let's say you ask me right now questions to explain questions or to explain stuff about the economy, that would be a challenge for me because it's something that I'm not used to talking about. So I think that when it comes to improvement, there are different aspects that we can work on. In my case, for example, I would choose specific areas that I don't often have to talk about, but if I had to, I would need specific vocabulary, expressions, collocations.
Yeah, but that's true for everybody, Mateus. I'm going to jump in, right? So as a native English speaker, last count that I was aware of, there's something like 650,000 words in the English language. No one knows all of those words, right? And that grows all the time because English grabs words from other languages. We make up new words. There's slang, then there's all the technical terms that are just constantly growing, right? So talk to me about finances, and I'm going to be able to talk to you about finances with quite a few terms, but I can start throwing out words that you guys may not know, right? And then same thing with medical terminology, right? Because a lot of our interpreters are medical interpreters. I guarantee you that there are few, if any, interpreters that know every single medical specialty and all of the vocabulary for all of those specialties, right? So it's just, you've got to keep learning. There's just no way around it. So, the other thing you can maybe think of, and I don't know how much this plays in, Sergio, so I'll let you talk to it, but what about accents? Right? Like, how much does your accent come into play in this test, right? Do they consider your accent at all, or is that not something that affects? Because a thick accent can definitely affect communication, right?
Yes. Your accent in terms of, is it more British or American or any other accent? It's something that they don't care much about. What they really focus on is intelligibility. It's how easy it is to understand you. And of course, they focus on different aspects of pronunciation, like isolated sounds and longer stretches of language, so intonation, rhythm. But it's mostly about intelligibility. How easy is it to understand someone? Of course, as you said, a very strong accent can affect communication, and people might struggle to understand what you're saying. But if you're mostly intelligible, that's okay. You don't have to have a specific accent. And that's a common misconception because some people believe that because it's a Cambridge exam, you have to, develop a British accent. Otherwise, they're going to fail you. Not at all. Not at all. That's not the case.
That's good to know, right? Because most of I would say that the majority of the interpreters that listen to our podcast, most of our audience probably does not have a British accent, right?
Yeah.
And since their target audience is in the US, it's probably also not something I would recommend developing, because you get on the phone and you're like, I do really bad accents, so I'm not gonna do a really bad British accent. But like if you got on with a British accent, might sound cool at first, but it's probably not what the patient or the provider are used to or want to hear. So nothing wrong with it, but most people tend to be more comfortable with accents that are closer to their own, right? Or easily, I'm going to say, interchangeable.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have one more question, Sérgio. How can you help our community? What kind of courses do you offer? What kind of training programs do you have? How can you help them take benefit of your more than 20 years of experience now?
I offer courses like exam prep courses aimed at the C1 Advanced exam or the C2 Proficiency exam. Normally, these courses take 2 semesters, so a year. Even though there are people just like yourself who take, Mateus took only 1 semester. He took only one part of the course, not the whole course.
Wow, we have a prodigy on with this.
He is.
That's awesome.
No.
Yeah, so he took one module, and then after one module, he said, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to go for it. I said, okay, you are? Sure, you should go. And I often tell people that even though the course is divided into 2 modules, you don't have to take the whole thing. And so, some people, again, like Mateus, they take one module and they feel, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to try it. But it's a 1-year course. And I also offer what I call language development courses. So courses that are not aimed at exam preparation. It's not going to prepare you for an exam, but it can help you develop your language awareness and even if your language proficiency, if that's your goal.
Awesome. In your test prep course, do you put them through like an example test so they can get comfortable with, the format?
Very often, actually. Yes. I love putting them under pressure. Sorry, Mateus.
No, that's fine.
No,
Fine.
that's
Okay.
great because a lot of people fail tests just because of nerves,
He
right?
experienced this firsthand, so
Yeah, every week, every week. But you know what? I feel like something that I worked a lot was writing. Like writing is something that you have to be
Mhm.
very careful with because you might fall short. You might think that you got the level, but when it comes to actually writing at C2 level, that's really difficult. So Sergio was very helpful, not only to teach exam strategies, but also to correct my essays and point out the areas where I could improve, the areas where I was talking too much and saying not a lot, like just putting a lot of words there, but I didn't have a lot to say. So he helped me out to see that and to structure my sentences in a better way. So I think that writing is one of the skills that you really have to work a lot if you want to take this exam. And Sergio can talk from experience. I think that that's also something that you see most students struggle with a lot, right?
Yes, and I think that on top of that, now with the AI writing assistant
Mm.
it's getting even harder because people rely on AI all the time to write texts and write emails, but then they decided to take an exam, and then they have to write. Mateus gave a very good example. The C2, you have to write 2 texts, Mark, and you have 45 minutes for each one of them. And you have to consider that there is planning involved, and you have to read 2 texts and extract the main ideas from these 2 texts, and then summarize those ideas and evaluate. And you have to do all that in 45 minutes. And then there are people that are already, they're so used to using AI to write text that it's hard for me as a tutor because then you have, not only do you have to help them develop writing as a skill, because it's not just giving them some tips. Oh, for you to write this YouTube proficiency essay, you do this, and that. Not really. You have to develop writing as a skill because they're still struggling to write, effective paragraphs. So you really have to take from the very beginning and then break it down and help them understand how it works and what the expectations are and what they have to do in order to show that, okay, because it's still possible. I think it's important to mention it's still possible to write a nicely written text that is not at C2 level of proficiency. Maybe your text is very coherent, your ideas are well connected, so you have cohesion. You have used some great words here and there. There's a good range of structures, but it's not at C2 level of proficiency. So then, if you have the right level of expertise, as a tutor, you can look at a text and say, okay, this is a great text, but you should have done this and that. But mostly nowadays, what I feel is that I have to help people develop writing as a skill.
Okay.
Because they're not quite there yet.
Audience, being interpreters, are going to say, but I don't write. I'm speaking all the time. So can you connect the importance of writing to speaking?
Yes. The way I see writing nowadays, the other day I was talking to someone who made a very good point. Said, okay, the person said, I think writing as a skill is dead. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. But because of people's over reliance on ChatGPT and those AI models, I think that when you're writing, it's a way of expressing your voice, and it's also a way of. I think it works as a thinking tool, in the sense that when you write, you're showing that it's something that you have thought through. You know exactly what you want to say and the words you need to use. And I think that, yes, if you're an interpreter, even though most of what you do is related to speaking, I think that it's important to help you to develop your writing skills, because I think that by writing, you're going to think better. You're going to, find your voice in another, let's say, I was going to say genre, but not the word I'm looking for, in another
modality.
Modality. Thank you. Yeah.
That's awesome. I 100% agree, right? Because AI is going to kill a lot of stuff, but it's going to kill a lot of bad stuff, right? Or maybe even mediocre stuff. But the people that are really good at what they do, they're going to use AI as a tool to help them be even better. but it's not going to replace what they do, especially writing, right? Like there is no AI that is ever, I mean, yeah, it can take all of my stuff and write in my voice, but it's still got biases. It's still got certain sentence structures that it likes to use. It's still got certain things that at least currently let you know it's an AI, right? It's not to say it's bad because it can do pretty decent writing, but it's not, it's like one of the analogies I like is like, no matter how many push-ups I do, Sergio, you're never going to get fit from the push-ups that I do, right? The same thing with AI. No matter how well AI writes, I'm never going to be a better speaker or writer from using AI, right? Because I'm not getting the reps in. I'm not developing those skills, right? And if I want to be a better interpreter, I really feel like I need to practice not only the interpreting skill that I need, but my language skills. And the way I'm going to develop those language skills isn't just speaking, it's also writing, like you said, because you get to think, you get to go back, you get to add in vocabulary, you get to change your words, you get to do so much that really develops those language skills that will make it easy to do whatever you're developing them for, which in this case would be interpretation. I don't know if you want to add on anything to what I said, or if I'm completely wrong and you're like, no, Mark, that's not the way it works. But
I totally agree with you. Yeah. While you're talking about it, it got me thinking about critical thinking. I mean, how can you develop your critical thinking through AI? I mean, if you keep asking it to write it for you,
That's tough.
That is tough, very tough, right? And so, so what is the value of paying you, Sergio? Is that going to, promote your courses? Tell us about like, why do people hire you as opposed to just going to YouTube and watching some videos, or or writing articles on their own, or like what is your value and why should people look for you or someone like you to help them get that C2 level?
And mention the Delta qualification as well, Sergio. That's very important.
Oh, yes. That was one of the reasons. I remember when you looked for me, you mentioned that the fact that something that stood out was the fact that I had a Delta, right? Are you familiar with that, Mark? The Delta?
I am not. Nope.
It's basically it's a teaching qualification. It doesn't focus on language proficiency. It's really about teaching. But it's one of the highest levels there is when it comes to teaching English as a foreign language. So it's pretty much equivalent to a master's in the UK. So this level of it's level 7, which in the UK is equivalent to a master's degree. And apparently it was something that was very important for Mateo. So thank you for bringing that up. And to answer your question, I think that one of the reasons why they look for me is because I work as a shortcut. I mean, I feel that for most people, they could, as you said, they could go on YouTube and they could watch videos about the C2, and they could buy those practice tests books and then do some mock exams and then check the key and try to understand where they're wrong. But I feel that if you have someone who knows their stuff, who knows what the exam entails, the techniques and the strategies that you need to develop, and also the language that you need to produce in order to pass that exam, I think it works as a shortcut. I mean, it can help you save time because, and also as someone who's not a native speaker of English, it's I've been there, been there, done that. It's something that many years ago, back in 2007, when I took my C2, was much harder because it was not that easy to find people who were like specialized in preparing you for proficiency exams. So I would say that my journey was full of ups and downs, but the silver lining is that going through that process, it helped me a lot to understand how the exam works, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you have to do in order to make sure that you're going to pass, you're going to succeed in it. So yeah, I would say I'm a shortcut in a way.
I love your, but not in a way, 100%. Like you can, there are only two ways to learn something, right? You can either do it yourself or you can pay to have somebody teach you. Like really, that's it, right? And so by paying, it's as an interpreter, what's your time worth? If you get to C2 in a year because you're already at C1, or if it takes you a few years because you're below that, like how much faster is that with you than it would have been the other way? Probably quite a bit, right? And what is that going to do for you as in your career? It's going to increase your income. It's going to increase your client satisfaction. It's going to hopefully allow you to maybe even branch out or at least, garner more clients because you're writing better emails to them. You're doing better marketing on LinkedIn. You're doing better interviews and conversations, right? So there's a lot there that's incredibly important. And I would add in one more thing, which is motivation, right?
Exactly.
When you're with a teacher, you're paying for this. You want to get your value. You're motivated to do everything you can. And even when you're having a bad day, the teacher, in this case you, is going to hopefully pull the best out of you and keep you moving along, right? YouTube doesn't do that. You can be sitting there watching YouTube and you're like, oh, today I don't really feel like it. I'm just going to drink a beer and go fishing, or whatever, you choose to do on your time off, right? But there's no motivation. There's no accountability, right? Because it's very easy for us to, I'll pick it up tomorrow, right? But if I've got a class with you tomorrow and I've got something to do, man, you know that I don't want to show up to class and be embarrassed and be like, teacher, I didn't write my essay, right? So, I think it's 100% worthwhile to find the right person for the skills you want to learn. Take the shortcut, pay for it, get there faster, make more money, because there's something called compounding. I love compound interest, right? Mm-hmm. And in this case, basically you're compounding your time. The faster you get to a point where you can make more money, the more money you're going to make in your lifetime. The slower you get to that point, of course, it's going to take you more time to actually make more money, right? So, if you don't have money to do it, well, that's our Finance Fridays. That's our other tips that we're working you through, right? But the point is you need to be able to invest in yourself, because you are your business, right? Whatever you choose to do that benefits you financially should have a return on investment that you're going to see, right? So your English, we've already talked about the value, right? So Sergio, if they want to find you, obviously they can see your name on the screen, but where should they look for you, right? And if you're not available, let's say you're booked up, right? And they want to find somebody else, right? Let's say that hopefully you've got more students than you can shake a stick at, than you can deal with, right? What should they look for in a teacher? Should it be that delta? Should it be what should they look for if you're booked? Start with you. Where can they fiend you? Give yourself a shout out.
Well, you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is Sérgio Pantoja, my first name and my last name, and then ELT, which stands for English Language Teaching. So Sérgio Pantoja ELT. You can find me on Instagram, also on LinkedIn, Sérgio Pantoja too. And I have a website, which is my name, Sérgio Pantoja, ELT.com.br.
And all the information will be here in our description as well, so people are going to find Sérgio very easily.
Yes. And to answer Mark's second question, I think that if you're looking for a tutor, and if it's not me, no problem. But if you'd like to have class with me, here I am. But if you're looking for a tutor, I think that number one, you should look for someone who's a highly experienced tutor, someone who has prepared other people and have helped them succeed. Because I've seen a lot of people, promising that they're going to take you from point A to point B in 2 months and 3 months, and as short as possible, because they want to sell their courses. So they're using lots of gimmick and marketing strategies. But I'll try to find examples. Something that I try to keep on my Instagram, because most of my clients today, they find me on Instagram, is in my highlights, I have people who took the exam and passed it. So I have their messages, I have their holding their certificates.
Testimonials.
The testimonials, yes. So I think you should look for social proof. I have helped this number of people, and here it is. And you're teaching, so it's not just about the language. So I believe that not everybody's going to have a Delta, but I believe that you have to find someone, you should find someone who is a highly competent teacher, someone you can trust that is going to be able to teach you. Because I've had people come to me from other people saying, I had a teacher with this so-and-so person that apparently they know a lot about the language, but they were not able to teach me. So they had a high level of language proficiency and language awareness, but they're not able to share their knowledge, pass it down. So I think it's important to consider that, not just the language aspect, but also the teaching aspect.
100%. Teaching is definitely a skill we've all had bad teachers, not because they're not experts at what they do, but because they don't know how to transmit that knowledge effectively, right? So 100%. I would also say, and I'll give this general advice to everybody, you get what you pay for, right? So some people look for the cheapest deal and the fastest deal, And if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And, quality doesn't come cheap. It's the same argument our interpreters are making. High quality should be, better paid. High quality should be better paid, guys. If you're going to go out and look for somebody to teach you to do something, make sure it's an expert, make sure they can transmit that knowledge, and make sure that it's not either outrageously expensive or, outrageously cheap. It should be, you should get what you pay for.
And I was there. I was Sérgio's student, so I'm telling you guys, this guy really knows how to teach and how to prepare you. You're not going to regret spending money. That's not spending, that's investing money. So I'm here telling you that he was a key component of my journey to get the C2 proficiency and to get the score that I got, which was a very great score. So yes, Sergio is an amazing instructor when it comes to teaching that. Look him up on social media. You can find him on Instagram, his website, everything. I'm going to link everything here on the description as well. And if you go after Sergio and if you want to become his student, just send him a message and say that you came because of InterpreterHUB.
And he's honest.
Thank you,
Did you
Mateus.
hear him say that not everybody is like Mateus, right? That not everyone's going to take half his course and get a perfect score on their Cambridge C2, right? So, that ethical is great. Sergio, any last words or before we end?
Once again, thank you for the opportunity. I was great to talk to. And I think this is the first time that I've been on a podcast that's not strictly related to English teaching. And I've been talking today from a different perspective. And I just loved it. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll see you guys later. If you're not already subscribed to the Interpreter Hub, please do give us a like here on What's Up. Please do subscribe to our newsletter, which is very hard to find, interpreter-hub.com, right? And just continue to follow us because we will continue to add value, have great guest speakers that are going to teach us all different things that are all relevant to your professional development. And we're going to continue to add other tools. We have some big stuff in the works, guys, that will add value. So join us. Welcome to the community. Keep following us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.